Let's move on to Medi-Cal eligibility. Medi-Cal, as I mentioned before, covers low-income individuals, but not all of them, only those who are considered, quote, the worthy poor. Before I explain what that term means, let me state that we at the National Health Law Program believe that everyone in the United States should have access to free and universal health care services. Unfortunately, not many of the policymakers in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, California, agree with us. So instead of universal health care, what we have is a safety net program meant to cover some individuals who would otherwise be uninsured. Nationally, that program is Medicaid, and in California, it is Medi-Cal. Who is eligible for Medi-Cal? Everyone who is poor and uninsured? Unfortunately not. To be considered part of the, quote, worthy poor and qualify for Medi-Cal, you need to have the right personal characteristics and the right financial condition. Under personal characteristics, you need to fit under a category of, quote, worthiness. These categories include 4 different groups: parents, children, the elderly, and individuals with disabilities. If you're not in one of those groups, you generally cannot qualify for Medi-Cal. This means that a single man under the age of 65 with no disabilities and no children is ineligible for Medi-Cal, even if he is homeless or he has no income. He is determined not to be, quote, worthy. Next, you must have acceptable immigration status or proof of U.S. citizenship. Since February 2006, when the Deficit Reduction Act was passed by Congress and signed by the President, almost all Medicaid applicants and beneficiaries who are U.S. citizens have had to prove their citizenship in order to be eligible for Medicaid benefits. This mandate has been very burdensome on many beneficiaries and applicants who have difficulty obtaining necessary documents. There's quite a bit of information about this mandate on the Health Consumer Alliance website. We encourage you to go there and find out how to help your clients meet this requirement. In addition to citizens, most legal immigrants are eligible for full Medi-Cal. Among those who qualify are legal permanent residents, also known as green card holders, asylees, refugees, Cuban and Haitian entrants, and battered spouses and children under the Violence Against Women Act. Let me point out that individuals who are undocumented but meet the other requirements for Medi-Cal eligibility can receive limited scope Medi-Cal services. These benefits encompass pregnancy-related services, family planning services, emergency care, nursing home care, and kidney dialysis. In California, there's no 5-year bar to accessing Medi-Cal benefits for individuals who arrived in the U.S. after August 22, 1996. But several other states do bar recent immigrants from full Medicaid coverage. Those states require that even qualified legal immigrants wait 5 years before accessing public benefit programs. Even in those states, however, immigrants can receive emergency care and often other limited services. The final requirement under the personal characteristics designation is state residency. To show that you are a state resident, you have to be physically present in the state where you are applying and also have the intent to reside there indefinitely. Some examples of documents that you can show to prove state residency are a driver's license, a mortgage statement, a lease, your utility bills, documents showing that your child is enrolled in school, and a W-2 form from your employer. Next, we will discuss financial condition. In order to financially qualify for Medi-Cal, you must have both low income and limited resources. For purposes of determining Medi-Cal eligibility, only people with limited income are eligible. The most common example of income, which falls under the category of earned income, is wages. The wages you bring home in this month make up some or all of your earned income for the month. You may also have unearned income and exempt income. Examples of unearned income are money that you make from stock dividends or from interest from a savings or checking account. Additionally, there's exempt income, which is not considered for eligibility purposes. Examples of exempt income include public assistance, public education loans, and Section 8 vouchers. Let's move now to resources. What is the difference between income and resources? A resource, also called property or an asset, is generally a tangible item of value. Income that was received in a prior month and not spent in that month becomes a resource the following month. Say in the month of March you earned $2,000. That is income in the month of March. If you put that money into your savings account, then in the month of April, it becomes countable as a resource or asset. The value of resources is considered for Medi-Cal eligibility for most programs except for the federal poverty level programs for children, the foster care programs, and the breast and cervical cancer treatment program. Generally, individuals are only allowed resources or assets of $2,000 or less, and couples $3,000 or less. As with income, there are exempt resources, which are not considered for eligibility purposes. The most common example of an exempt resource is the home you live in. So what income and resources are considered? Only the income and resources available to you are counted. Taking the previous income example, if you earn $2,000 in March but are not paid that money until April, your March wages are not counted until April. Those wages are not available to you in the month of March, but first become available in the month of April. Availability of a resource also gets tricky with 401k accounts or pensions. These are often considered available resources for Medi-Cal eligibility purposes, even though there is a stiff penalty for taking money out of a retirement account. We've covered what income and resources are considered for Medi-Cal eligibility. Next, we move on to whose resources are considered, which we call deeming. Only the income and resources of a person who has legal obligation to provide financial support to the beneficiary may be considered. For children, individuals who are legally responsible for them are their parents, but not their grandparents or unrelated step-parents. For an adult, it is her marital spouse, but not a live-in boyfriend or girlfriend. Additionally, income of a child is not considered for the parent's eligibility, and parent's income is not considered if the applicant is over the age of 21. Advocates trying to determine if a family qualifies for Medi-Cal should first look at the cash assistance category to which an applicant is most closely linked. Cash assistance categories include groups of individuals receiving SSI, CalWORKs, and foster care payments. Let's move now to a discussion of general categories of eligibility. Remember, I mentioned that in order to qualify, you have to be a parent, a child, an elderly individual, or a person with a disability. Pregnant women as future parents also qualify. On the left-hand side of this diagram are mandatory groups. These are groups that the federal government requires all states to cover in their Medicaid programs. They include certain groups of families, children, and pregnant women, certain elderly and disabled individuals, as well as low-income families who have lost CalWORKs due to increased earnings. Optional groups on the right-hand side of this diagram are very similar to mandatory groups. Where these groups differ significantly from mandatory groups is that the federal government does not require states to cover them. States can choose to do so, and California has chosen to cover these groups. Also, optional groups have higher incomes than mandatory groups. Optional groups include those who are eligible for but haven't applied for SSI and CalWORKs, pregnant women and infants with higher incomes, medically needy individuals, and those over 65 or disabled with incomes up to 100% of the federal poverty level. This brings us to the end of the section on the framework of the Medi-Cal program. If you have any questions, there are many places you can turn to, including the Health Consumer Alliance website at www.healthconsumer.org, which I mentioned before. On the website, there is a manual that we developed called the Overview of the Medi-Cal program, which can be downloaded from that website for free. Additionally, there are fact sheets and consumer brochures on most Medi-Cal programs on healthconsumer.org. Fact sheets are geared toward advocates, and consumer brochures, of course, toward health consumers. In addition to the HCA website, there's the National Health Law Program's website, www.healthlaw.org. There you will find a great deal of information, including legal analyses and federal advocacy tips on federal and state health policies. Additionally, we have a website called www.healthcarecoach.com, which can help middle-income consumers with private insurance coverage retain their coverage and reduce their health care costs. Please do not hesitate to contact me, Manju Kulkarni, or my colleague, Randy Boyle, if you have any questions about this or other presentations, or questions about the Medi-Cal program generally. Thank you for viewing this presentation. We hope that it is helpful to your work.